Welcome to the Nia Jochuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. In this episode, we conclude our look at the 1993 Bagua Journal article on Luo De Xiu. In this episode, Luo discusses the stages of learning Bagua Zhang, which he refers to as the mother palms, the linked palms, and the smooth palms, and sort of the progression that you go through in training Bagua Zhang. And in the Patreon, we finish up our look at the Taiwan Wulin article by Luo De Xiu about his grand teacher, Zhang Feng. So check it out. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening, and be well.
In today's episode, we'll continue our discussion of the Gao style of Bagua. I'm drawing on an article from Bagua Journal, Volume 3, Number 5 from 1993, focused on Luo De Xiu. This next part of the article talks about his sort of training progression philosophy of, starting with very simple, basic movements. He even does the Bagua circling forms in a straight line to start off with, so you can sort of get them down. Then you start doing them in a smoother manner, and then you start doing them in a more intuitive and flexible and real smooth manner. So you build up to those stages over years of training. So I think it'll be interesting to look at Luo De Xiu's process of teaching. So sort of starting where we left off, he says, the beginner at Luo school will first learn the Xintian Baguazhang movements. Xintian meaning the circling forms. At this stage, the movements are executed so that each single movement is clearly defined. The focus of practice is to move smoothly, develop root, and combine the body and mind. Luo states that the mind should permeate all of the movements in Baguazhang. Execution of the Baguazhang form in this detailed manner develops gongli, or trained strength. Progress at this level is attained through the detailed body movement combined with proper mental focus. In Luo's opinion, the form should never be practiced in a casual manner. So that's, like he's saying, each single movement is clearly defined. So that's how I think that's maybe how everyone should teach beginners. Although honestly, some schools do it differently. Like I also trained in Southern style martial arts, and last night we were doing Wing Wu Gar, and that system was designed to just throw you in the deep end. You just start doing the exercises in your first class, and no one explains anything. You just charge right into it and start doing all these moves and footwork and punches and kicking and like, hey, sink or swim, deal with it, and like. I can see that philosophy too. It starts out super frustrating, and then once you start to figure it out, it feels really good to get that level of success. Whereas learning each single movement clearly defined and carefully and smoothly, I personally think that's probably the better way to go, but I think the case could be made in either direction. Should you start by doing a bunch of reps, or should you start by doing each move really carefully and get it polished first?
One way to get the precision is through doing a bunch of reps. It's probably not as efficient as if somebody just shows you what to do. Right?
But learning it yourself forces you to really think about it and really engage your brain. You're not having it spoon-fed to you kind of. So I don't know.
You're also going to weed out a lot of people who aren't really that
That's for
serious
sure.
about it.
Yeah, the two new beginners that night disappeared. Like they would never return.
Yeah, I mean, there's a piece of it where like if you put people through a like pretty intense workout, like you get rid of the people that are not serious about training, and then
That's true.
I mean, also I think that this is whenever you talk like things like this where they're talking about the sort of how someone teaches, quote unquote, that's always the ideal, but it rarely works out that way because people don't, people are fairly, not always very consistent, right? So somebody might come for a little while and then something happens in their life and they miss a few weeks and then they come back. So
Right.
you can't always predict how things are going to go down, but you can at least have a sense of, okay, well, first I want to teach the person I think it's like connect the dots, right? You want to know exactly where each position, point A to point B. And that's kind of that. You're not stopping, but there's a little bit of a staccato flavor to it.
Yeah.
So that you're clear about, okay, this is where this piece of the movement starts. This is where this piece of the movement ends. And this is where, I go
Make
into
it super clear.
Yeah. So you're not muddling it in just kind of
Right.
becoming this sort of sloppy thing.
And I think that's what Lowe's saying when he says the form should never be practiced in a casual manner.
Yeah, in internal martial arts, part of that is being, it's your focus in a sense. It's your mind being able to, as you said, penetrate through the movement, right? So,
Staying present throughout the movement. That's
yeah, and I mean, essentially, this is kind of what Shingy does, right? But you have to get it so that every movement, as you go from one movement to the next, you stay relatively connected both physically and mentally. And
right.
that's the first stage of learning anything is you're kind of learning, where to put your body at what
Yeah.
time, right? So
And he
again,
said he calls it here to combine the body and mind, which
yeah,
Lo will and person will say become the one.
right. Well, that's yeah. I mean,
Sort of unify yourself. And that
right,
seems
and
like
that's
a for all internal martial arts, that's going to be your first primary concern, right?
it's
Yeah.
your primary, but it's also like the thing you're working, it's the first thing you're doing and the last thing you're
Right,
doing, right?
right,
Is working on trying to merge those two things because
right.
it's never really done merging in this.
Yeah.
And so the practice is to because once it merges, it becomes something else that you're going to work through, right? So again,
Right.
and
To find the
that's
next
kind of
stage of merging that. Each
right. Well,
stage,
that's
you get
where
better at each stage of that.
after you do the sort of staccato one, right? Then you start. Um, Bruce described it as like you're rounding the edges, like you're sanding something, So at first you have these sort of, the rough edges of the thing, but you know exactly where, one corner is versus the next. And then as you get to that second stage, you still keep the shape and the intent, but you're smoothing out the transitions a little bit, right? So instead of it being like a one, two, three. It's like a one and a two and
Right,
a three. It has a little bit more where
right.
you're staying that ability to stay connected extends through the transitions
And I
essentially.
think for low, that's the second stage here. I'll read this next stage here. So after the students have had considerable amount of practice with this level of training, low will teach them to practice the same form movements in a smooth, continuous manner. This is the Lianhuan level of training. While the movements of the first level were meticulous and step by step, the movements at the Lianhuan level continuously flow together. The transitions from one move to the next within each form section are imperceptible. The form becomes seamless. In the first level practice, the root is apparent in each movement, and each movement is clearly defined. In this second Lianhuan level, the practitioner works to connect all movements so that the power is consistently available. There's no movements in which the expression of power appears obvious, and there are no movements which lack power. At this level, the form movements and expression of power also become more subtle. Lowe states that the practitioner should learn to deliver a great amount of force from any part of the body at any time and express that force through small body movements. A practitioner who cannot accomplish this will always be too slow in a fighting situation. So that's that second phase you're talking about where you sort of blend it together, smooth those corners. I like the idea of being able to express power in any direction at any time. I mean, how would you test that? Like while you're doing a form, you just stop in some weird position, then bump out with an elbow or a shoulder or your, head or
Well, I mean that's one way to do it. I mean, the idea of what he's talking about is like the way Bruce describes that, that's the two phrases, right? From posture to posture, the internal energy and is unbroken. And
mm,
from one part moves, all parts move, and one part
mm,
stops, all parts stops, right? The idea that you have an integrated physical movement, right? But then you have a continuous mind through that movement, right? And again, as they start to kind of merge, you hit that place where everything is just smooth, right? And a lot of it's about kind of not getting ahead of yourself. I mean, in
mm.
one sense, that like when you're not integrated, what will happen is either the top or the bottom will move out of sync with the other one, and you get that sort of disconnected thing. Um, so that's what that first stage is about, is making sure each movement as you go is from posture to posture, it's unbroken, right? That one part moves, you move to the next. Then when
Hmm. Like that first you get each posture, then you make them unbrokenly connected, kind of.
right. And it's the second thing of the mind part about it leading you through it is kind of what, that's the part that's not it's not physical. It's that, like you're doing the same thing, but it's just something changes and you're a little bit more fluid with it, mostly through your intent. I mean, it's like your body's going to relax and get more open and that sort of thing. But really, what happens is it's like driving kind of. When you first, the very first time you get on the freeway, it seems really intense and everything is moving really fast. But
Mm,
after you drive for a decade or so, you don't even
sure.
notice it. It's like it doesn't even affect you anymore. So you're doing the same thing, but your mental acuity is just sharper. And
So, I
that's
mean, that brings me back to that power thing. Like he says, you should be able to deliver great amounts of force from any part of the body at any time through small body movements. Like that's a pretty tall order.
yeah, well, that's the one part moves, all parts move,
Mm,
right? Because if everything is connected, right, there really isn't moving just like an elbow. Everything
mm,
is going to move, and the concentrated point, is the
mm.
elbow, right? So the way I think of it is it's like a spiky ball that you
Huh,
have. A spiky ball will roll because if all the spikes are the same length, it's still a ball. But if
sure.
you push on any one part of it, that individual thing can poke you,
The
right?
whole
So
ball is behind
yeah,
each spike,
yeah.
kind of.
And so it's not like one spike is shooting out of the ball.
Hmm.
That's kind of the external thing, right? Where you hold your
Single
body and then
punches.
you're going to shoot out that one spike with all the force, right? This is the whole ball moves and it just sort of concentrates to whatever's to where the pressure's coming in,
Contact point,
right?
kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, and that ability, so this is what in Tai Chi things like shoulder stroke, that whole principle of using the shoulder and the body,
Hmm.
the bumping, right? That's
Hmm.
where this comes into Tai Chi as well, right? It's the idea that the hands and feet aren't the only weapons you got,
Hmm.
basically, is the idea that your whole body becomes able to be a weapon in a sense.
I mean, part of I'm thinking of like when I first learned Bagua and I was doing the moves as best as I could. If I had ran into somebody, I would have bounced off them and fallen down. But then once I sort of connected my body and got it all together, if I were, if I'm do a palm change and my hand happens to swat somebody, it would knock them over potentially, right? Like that unification now means whatever part of my body happens to impact the other person, something's behind it. Instead of me falling down, they fall down. So that's just a natural progression of training as your mind and body unify and connect more and you get a more smooth connection, then it doesn't matter exactly if I'm swinging my leg forward or my arm is moving or even my torso is turning. Whatever gets in the way of that is going to take that whole body impact ideally.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back a few episodes, we talked about the swinging power, right?
Yeah,
And this
yeah.
idea
Swy
that
show, yeah.
basically, your legs are swinging your body, and that's going to swing your arms. So there's this integrated thing hitting you, not a segmented thing. And so in Bagua, for example, it's like your forearms are the first one that you kind of start to develop. That's you're not gonna when something's coming at you, you're not trying to hit it with your palm. You're gonna
Hmm.
try to contact it with your forearm and then use your palm to hit the person, right?
Hmm.
So you start getting, oh, I can use my forearm. And then, as you get a little bolder and you're not quite as afraid of getting close to people, it becomes your sort of upper arm and a little
Hmm.
bit of your shoulder. And that's where you're getting in real close and just, you got that sort of almost like shoulder stroke in Tai Chi where you're
Hmm.
sort of bumping them as you're hitting them in a sense. So you're knocking them off balance with it. And then you can go that third stage was this is sort of the dragon body
Yeah.
of where you're almost going to slam into them with your ribs or your torso to knock them as you're hit, you're that
Right.
close where it's
That
like,
sticking and you're using your hand, your arm, and your body hitting somebody on multiple angles at once in a very high speed, intuitive way that
yeah, I mean, it's
it's hard
so
to
for
describe.
well, in Rosho, so the way Bruce would have us train this is you would work from first your wrist was the contact point as you're going around and around. Then you would get to where it's your forearms, and you can't really do the upper arm and the shoulder until you start moving your feet. But that's where you start, because that's you're just unless you got really short arms, you're just gonna hit the person
Yeah,
before
yeah.
you even before you even finish the motion, basically, right? But that's the idea, is that you have these sort of, far open, like long, medium, short distances, right?
Mm. So the next section is he talks about this third level of training. So while the movements of each form section in the second stage of training flow together smoothly and continuously so that an observer cannot see where one move of the form ends and another begins, in the third level of training, which he calls Yushen, this level of training, the practitioner expands the same movements, appearing to make them spontaneous and freeform. Although the practitioner training at the second Yushen, training at this third Yushen level will be executing the same form sequence that was practiced at the previous two levels, he or she will now be creative in the timing and articulation of the changes. At the first level, the practitioner moves step by step in a somewhat staccato fashion. At the second Lianhuan level, the practitioner linked the steps together so that there was continuity. The number of movements per step remains the same at the Lianhuan level, however, all the moves flow continuously. At the Yushen level, the practitioner may take 5 steps in the execution of a movement that was practiced with only 1 step at the Lianhuan level. The rhythm and tempo of the movements and the manner in which the body movements are coordinated with the footwork are variable and spontaneous at this level. The upper and lower body are continuously moving and changing. The practitioner takes the principle of change inherent in the I Ching and applies it to the physical form. Lowe states that at this level, the mind is creating the movement spontaneously, and the form becomes very expansive. So Yushen means swimming body. So it's often
Right.
called like Lianhuan, Yushen. There are Bagua terms that a lot of schools use of like
Right. Well,
flowing,
yeah, it's
continuous,
where the
connected, swimming dragon, sometimes they'll say.
well that's where the name of the Chenting Law School, right, or one of
Mm,
the names for it, is the swimming dragon, right? Because
right.
so, like, if you just take the single palm change, because that's the easiest one to describe it, it's like instead of just it being one step to turn in, one step to turn out, right? And then you're going to finish the chop. You might take, 2 or 3 steps to make a bigger, um so you're not doing a kobu in 1 step, you're going to do it in
Mm,
4,
sure,
right?
sure.
And then you're going to take a long time to bring that chop around. So, you might do that last chop.
Right.
That could take a whole circle, right? You can
Couple
just,
circles to just
yeah.
long.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I think of it as it's like you're stretching your mind out a little bit, right?
Mm,
So it's this timing thing of um the the rhythm becomes flexible.
mm,
It's polyrhythm instead of single rhythm,
hmm,
right? So you have multiple rhythms at the same time, which allows you to kind of go in and out of phase with things. So sometimes it's like you're moving slower than your feet, your arms are moving slower than your feet,
hmm,
and sometimes your feet will move at the same speed, and then sometimes they'll move faster, and
hmm.
it's just sort of all kind of, it's very it's jazz in the sense. I mean, that's the
Yep.
way I think of it, is that like the biblical one is my will, thy will, and no will, right?
Hmm,
That, the first one is I am doing it with my intent, right? The second one is I'm allowing what's happening to just sort of flow with it, right? And then the third one is I'm just swimming in the goo and just kind of letting things go where it
let
takes.
the form do you, as some people say.
Yeah, that's Bruce's line, is you stop
Oh
doing
yeah.
the form and the form does you. One of the things you'll see with Bagua people when they start to kind of riff, is that they'll start doing something that looks like a palm change that you recognize, but then there'll be some little thing that they do differently, and it's like, a little bit of a head scratcher because you can't quite figure out what it was that was different.
Right.
It's just because something is, that you just they have a certain thing, and it's hard to like describe, but when you see it, you go, oh, that's like there's just a certain, like connectivity between the top and bottom, even when the movements seem somewhat disconnected.
Definitely. Yeah. So you're connecting and disconnecting in any way that you choose at that point.
I mean, the way Bruce described it is you no longer are limited by your physical body alignments. So you're able to do things based on internal alignments. For example,
Hmm.
like really cross your arms a whole bunch or twist your body a whole bunch because
Or lean in some way or
yeah,
another that
or
you wouldn't
like bend
do
backwards
normally.
or some shit. But it's because those internal connections have gotten so like entwined.
Yeah.
When you do an external movement, your body just kind of knows what to do.
Like that reminds me of Lowe's concept of the one where at first you've got to make sure externally everything's lined up just right. But once you've woven all the stuff inside you, now you're way more flexible. You can move and whip and change in all kinds of ways that may not look like they're necessarily alignment correct. But like you said, those internal alignments are now much stronger, so that enables you to go in directions that you couldn't before, and that's this third level of training for
Right.
sure.
So like the way Bruce does this in his system is he does it through single palm, double palm, wind palm, right? That so rather than it being you go through all of the changes with one thing and then
Mm.
through all of them with the next one.
That would be Lowe's way of doing it. You
Right.
learn all of
Which is
them, then
Lowe's
you
way.
go through them a second time and connect them. Yeah.
Bruce is he's too stingy with the movements, so he gives you one
Yeah.
movement to do for the first one, right? Which is the
Right.
single palm change, and then he gives you another movement for the second one,
For
which
that
is
Leon
double
Juan
palm,
stage takes
right?
place in double palm.
And
Yeah.
then you get the smooth one in the wind palm change, and then you go through the rest of it, and once you do that, then you cycle back to the beginning and start doing all of them at that third stage. But it's like you go through it first as a linear thing in
Right.
changes. But because I don't think it really is movement related that much, so it's more
I mean,
about
his way of doing it makes sense because the single palm change he always teaches it as very clear, step by step, one move at a time. Double palm change, you start to get a little more connected and fluid as you do it. And then when he teaches wind palm change, it's just like
yeah.
there's no move by move. It's just a big swirling, tornado. So like there's nowhere to stop anyways, even if you wanted to. So you're at that third level of training, like it or not, at that point, which is kind of elegant in its own way.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just assuming that the reason he does it that way is part of it is just because you don't know if someone's going to be around long enough to teach them all the changes.
So the next section he says, so he sort of just uses that music analogy. So he says, progressing from the first level to the second level and then to the third Yushen level of training can be compared to a musician starting with scales, moving to executing prearranged compositions, and then finally to improvisation. While the melody is recognizable when a song is being played by an improvisationalist, he makes the song his own through creative interpretation around the melodic line. Each time the song is played, the listener is presented with something new. Lo does the same with his Bagua when executing the form at the Yushen level. Like the melody of an improvised song, the form is recognizable, but the variations are endless. In a fighting situation, the ability to take fundamental principles based on the form movements and vary them to fit any situation is a key to success. Practicing at the Yushen Zhang level aids in developing this ability. So yeah, I mean that's kind of saying what we were just saying in terms of like if you really want to put it to use, that third level is critical because you can't go one, two, three when you're in a sparring freestyle situation. You have to be fluid, you have to be connected, and you have to be able to improvise and change in the circumstances. So it's nice to have that slow but sure progression to kind of get you there, but you're not really there until you're working on that third level in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that thing you used to say about, single palm changes, you're fighting one person,
Mm,
double palm changes, you're fighting two people, third, wind is you're starting to fight multiple
as
people, and
many as you can
and
handle.
get to that place of being able to do, unrehearsed things with multiple people. You have to be able to change in all kinds of ways
Right.
that
You
aren't
better be incredibly flexible.
those aren't
Yeah.
on the books. Those are, like you said, those are just what happens in that moment of spontaneity and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I think this is why most people get attracted to Bagua in a sense, is because there's that sort of mysterious aspect of it where it takes you into, it's the dragon coming out of its cave thing, right? That it does have this ability to bring out this sort of weird spontaneous ability to do things in a way that not a lot of other activities have it. I
Yeah.
had a little bit with Eight Drunken Immortals, and I think that's because they kind of use the same approach. Uh,
Hmm.
Eight Drunken Immortals is a little bit like it just jumps to that third level. It never really does.
Starts on the third level.
Yeah, well, it never really does anything that's all that um precise, right? It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
kind of loose and wiggly and stuff. But that ability to just kind of be ultra gushy, right? When you can then take that and sort of apply it to your structure, it allows you to be able to not be so rigid with your, this move is this thing and this move is that thing. It's like,
So the next thing he talks about is one of Lowe's things that he teaches in his classes that I've been to, where he tries to like boil things down to really basic principles that you can like get a grip on in terms of training and fighting. So he says, in explaining the three principles of movement and fighting, Lowe takes the I Ching theme and expands it to include two people. The three principles of movement in a two-person encounter are: one, the opponent moves and I'm still; two, the opponent is still and I move; and then three, both the opponent and I move. So those are the three possibilities that could happen in a sparring or fighting situation. They move, I move, or we both move. So he says, in the context of Bagua, these principles of movement are typically discussed in terms of circular motion, and the term still or stationary does not mean motionless. For example, in the first principle, where it says the opponent moves and I'm stationary, that includes a situation where I'm grabbing the opponent and pulling or throwing him by rotating my body. In relation to distance traveled forward, backwards, or laterally, I am stationary. However, my body's still in motion. Likewise, moving around a stationary opponent involves the opponent staying in one relative spot while I circle the opponent or otherwise move to seek an optimum angle of attack. The idea is not that they're just stock still, but like in a relative sense, one person's moving or the other. Um, and so he continues to say the possible variations on these three themes are endless. The students work with these three principles in combination with the principles of the I Ching in order to build a theoretical basis from which to study the art in more depth. Using the mind to research the principles of each form movement beyond the obvious technique is emphasized in Lowe's teaching. The students research the application of these principles by spending a lot of time practicing two-man drills based on the Ho Tien straight line Bagua Zhang set. Without this kind of study, it is difficult to add substance and meaning to the practice. So all that is to say, you take a normal in Bagua, each technique isn't just a technique. You've got to use it in terms of, am I using it to advance and attack the other person? Am I using it when they attack me? Am I using it when we both move at the same time? In other words, the concept is you can't just say, okay, it's a one, two, three. I attack, he blocks, I attack again. You've got to, each technique in Bagua has the potential to be used in any different way: high, middle, low, retreating, advancing, staying still, going to the left. You know what I mean? So you've got to like take the time to research each of these. And in his classes, he'll teach you and show you how all different ways to use each move. But then you've got to sort of get that into your brain and not stick with that old school sort of, back in the 60s, where if someone punches with the right fist, I use my left foot to block and then I cover
right.
with, it's like it can't be that staccato. It's got to be way more flexible. And that's when the beauty of Bagua and the uniqueness of it really comes out, because it's meant to be trained like that.
This is
Yeah, you can't
yeah,
just repeat the same app over and over and
yeah.
over to perfect it, which is not, you got to do that too, but the next step in internal martial arts is to then just try them every which way that you can until you find every subtlety you can dig out of it. And the more you can dig those, the more you'll be able to achieve with it. And, the less you dig into it, the less you'll be able to achieve with it. And so be it.
Poir.
And I think when you look at the stories of the great masters, a lot of times there's not necessarily they don't win with one specific technique. Where sometimes it's like crashing palm or single palm or whatever, but a lot of times it's like the opponent rushed in, there's a flurry of action, and then the Bagua master is tapping him on the shoulder from behind or whatever.
Right.
Like it wasn't necessarily a specific move, it was the whole ability to change and move that allowed them to win without necessarily crippling the opponent or
Right.
whatever. And
So like a Shingy master story would go something like, dumbass came at master and master used crushing
feng
fist,
shui.
right?
Right.
Used a specific technique. Bagua would be something like dumbass came at master and master moved like the wind,
Yeah.
or did the smooth changing,
Or
eight
if was
bone,
standing on top of
right?
a 12-foot
Yeah.
wall looking down and the opponent was
Right, but
flabbergasted or just
but
some
it'll
random
it'll
shit
it'll
like that.
describe the way the person moved, not the
Mm,
technique that they
mm.
moved, or the
Yeah,
result of
that
the
is
movement, not the technique. And I think that's kind of a telling little thing that it's like you say. I mean, probably because the person watching it was just like, I had no
what the
idea what the
hell?
fuck they
Yeah.
did, and was like, I don't know. He just ended up on top of the guy.
And that's also a tribute to Bagua's ideal of always changing, always shifting,
Right.
always recreating something new all the time. So you never, the ideal is to never truly manifest any specific technique. It's just to have them all functioning at once. And whatever they put into you, you come back with something you don't even know what you're going to do, kind of.
Yeah.
And that's
Bruce's
pretty
line
awesome when it works.
in Eight Drunken Immortals was, if I don't know what I'm going to do next, you can't know what I'm going to do
Right.
next. Right.
That
But I,
definitely
I
goes for
remember,
Bagua.
I think it was in Lowe's, because right around the same time this came out was when his first video came out, or somewhere in there. And I think in that he says something like, Bagua is not a system of techniques, it's a system of change. And it's just like
Mm.
kind of a throwaway line. But when I was like 18 or 19, when I heard that, I was like, oh, there was something about that that resonated with me, of like, oh, this is not just about doing a bunch of, you know, preset sort of, if this, then that. It's about
Yeah.
kind of getting in touch with this, the nature of change. And I was like, oh,
Uh,
that's cool. Well, I think like you, I was a I Ching nerd. I had that.
Holy.
I'd read the I Ching and I thought it was super cool, but I didn't know anything about, martial arts. And then there was like,
Right.
oh, there's a martial art that goes with this. Fuck yeah.
Right. And now count me in, man.
Which I
That's
think
the
is not
shit I've
how
been looking
most
for.
people kind of come to that. Most people kind of come to it like they're interested in martial arts, and then, like, what the hell's the I Ching?
Yeah,
All right.
Bagua nerds find their martial art
Exactly.
eventually, because
Right.
man, it's the place to be. It's good stuff.
Yep. Yep. For sure.
All right, well, I think it's time for me to bail, so
Okay. Sounds
let
good,
us
bro.
to pick it up next time.
All right. Hey, folks, thanks for listening. You can go over to the Patreon, join for $5 a month, and hear the extended bonus episodes, as well as exclusive interviews. And each week we put out a regular episode. We also put out a bonus episode. So take a look at that. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.